Why is it the butler is the first to be considered as the culprit in a mysterious case? Well, in today's Bible mystery, the butler happens to be the culprit. Bible Sleuth here again, and today I'm going to get to the bottom of one of the more baffling parable cases. Let's see if the servant can get out of the mess he got himself into this time. Let the hunt begin in Luke 16, 1-9. He also said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager.' And the manager said to himself, 'What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses.' So, summoning his master's debtors, one by one, he said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, 'How much do you owe?' He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of the light. And I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings.'" I don't know about you, but a lot of that didn't quite add up in my feeble mind. This parable invokes a number of mysterious questions which are going to need to be fleshed out to truly understand what is being said, I think. First of all, this parable comes on the heels of the parable of the prodigal son. Was it part of the lost parables, or did this start a new series? What position does the steward hold in the story? What did Jesus mean by, "For the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of the light"? What about his last statement? "And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings"? That seems really weird. And you should hear it in the King James. It's even worse. I want to be honest here. I have recently mentioned some of my steps of inquiry, such as looking at original wording or looking at context to uncover meaning. But I have not mentioned prayer. It's critical to seek the Lord's wisdom, especially when stumped. As I mentioned about my other steps, such as wording and context and such, prayer needs to be fundamental to find out what he really means. You see, Jesus doesn't want us to be in the dark about what he said. In fact, James 1, 5 and 6 says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all who without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind." Jesus said this in John 16:13, "When he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he will guide you into all truth. He will not speak of his own. He will speak only what he hears, and he will tell you what is yet to come. He will glorify me, because it is from me that he will receive what he will make known to you." So back to the parable, or should I say parables, because this parable seems to fall into a group that actually starts the series. In this case, it is possible that the complete understanding comes from both parables. I must say that for years I fell into the mindset that the rich ruler was God, which absolutely made no sense at all. If it doesn't make sense, then it probably isn't right. So if you have been in that same camp, let's rethink our preconceived notions about this case. Come to find out, it is quite likely that the ruler was as crooked as the steward. This story is a contrast with the next parable, a rather famous parable, in fact. One reason for that fame is that it is the only one that names a character, the rich man and Lazarus the beggar. So due to the complexity of both parables, we will continue this series in the next video. So let's look at the unjust steward. The context is probably the most compelling information to understand this. First, who is he addressing? Well, verse 1 mentions speaking to the disciples. However, reading further down, you come to Luke 16:14 through 15. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they ridiculed him. And he said to them, "You are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God." So what can we deduce? He and the disciples were not alone. In fact, it is quite possible that the Pharisees might have actually been associated in the parable as the certain rich man. However, they could also have been associated with the unjust steward, with the Roman authority over them serving as a certain rich man. But the important context is that the Pharisees were there, and they weren't happy about his little stories and his teachings. To further the contextual background for which true meaning may be found, we have to go back in time. The book of Deuteronomy is an ongoing description of God's laws that were actually establishing a nation out of a huge group of clans and extended families. They had been familiar mostly with slavery. Deuteronomy served as the ancient constitution for Israel, founded by God himself. I mentioned Deuteronomy 15:1 through 7 in the parable of the money lender forgives unequal debts, but the same scripture lays out a solid foundation for these parables as well. At the end of every 7 years, you must cancel debts. This is how it is to be done. Every creditor shall cancel any loan they have made to a fellow Israelite. They shall not require payment from anyone among their own people, because the Lord's time for canceling debt has been proclaimed. You may require payment from a foreigner, but you must cancel any debt your fellow Israelite owes you. However, there need be no poor people among you, for in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess, and as your inheritance, he will richly bless you. If only you fully obey the Lord your God and are careful to follow all these commands I am giving you today. For the Lord your God will bless you as he has promised, and you will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none. You will rule over many nations, but none will rule over you. If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites, in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The 7th year, the year for canceling debts, is near, so that you do not show ill will toward the needy among your fellow Israelites and give them nothing. They may then appeal to the Lord against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. Give generously to them, and do so without a grudging heart. Then because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites, who are poor and needy in your land. However, look at chapter 23, 19 through 20. Do not charge a fellow Israelite interest, whether on money or food or anything else that may earn interest. You may charge a foreigner interest, but not a fellow Israelite, so that the Lord your God may bless you in everything put your hand to in the land you are entering to possess. This, however, was not followed, and rich people acquired property that was not returned to the ancestral ownership, and instead became rented out for a sizable percentage of profits that had to be paid, whether the land provided enough profit to pay the price or not. This was a workaround to avoid charging interest according to Deuteronomy. This only led to indebted tenant farmers on their own land who would never be able to pay off their rental agreement. The wealthy landowner, who probably didn't live locally, would have hired a steward or manager to live on the properties and manage them at his discretion. I'm beginning to wonder if many of the Pharisees were conducting similar business practices. In a previous episode, it was mentioned that Pharisees had sold out to the Roman government as a means of obtaining wealth, and they flaunted their pious, lavish lifestyles. It is probable that Jesus was addressing that specifically. With that as a contextual background, we see that the rich man and the steward were scoundrels. The steward, who was called on the carpet, called all the debtors. Note he probably added his own percentage to the debtor's debt, but removed his fees, thus eliminating their debts altogether. By doing this, he bought himself a place to go when the rich man kicked him out. In some ways, he may have even plundered the rich man. To demonstrate how unscrupulous the rich man was, he praised the steward's shrewd behavior, even though it was at his own expense. It is quite probable that Jesus singled out the scoffing Pharisees with this story. Proof being, he addressed them directly and harshly 4 verses later. Looking at the previous explanation, this begins to explain quite a bit, but there's still a question of, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. It doesn't make sense, right? And let me tell you that the commentaries on it don't fully agree either. I will say that this parable is probably one of the most skipped parables, both in study and in sermon. I've gone to church all of my life, and I still remember sermons on various topics, but I can't remember ever hearing this parable referenced or preached, ever. My feeling, if it's in there by God's divine sovereignty, then He doesn't want us to be ignorant of the message that was being delivered. I must also admit that it may have been somewhat prophetic as I start comparing current times. So what do we make of it? Well, there are a couple clues that I think are noteworthy. First, for the children of this world can be safely seen as non-believers in Jesus. The following phrase, are in their generation, is of interest. There is the transliteration from the original word, which according to Thayer's lexicon means himself, herself, itself, themselves. The word used for generation, pronounced geneha, could mean age or a time period. Let's rewrite it. For the children of this world are in themselves of the age intelligent, wise, prudent, and mindful of one's their own interest, more so than children of the light. I can only say, I should hope so. One who is mindful of their own interest is not living out God's plan. Notice too that this statement comes after a colon, meaning that it further defines the previous statement, because he had done wisely. 1 Corinthians 1:25 says, "For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength." Verse 27 goes on to say, "But God chose the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of this world to shame the strong." I'm beginning to think that Jesus possibly was identifying that wisdom of the world has nothing to do with the wisdom that the children of light should possess. Could this have been satirical? If so, the following statement falls right in line with that satire. In the King James Version it says, "Make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations." Will making friends of the treasures of unrighteousness lead to everlasting habitation when one dies? Yes, it will, but not in the way that we perceive it. In my current employment, I've met many people, some quite successfully ruthless during their lifetime. Sadly, they went out of this life fighting a miserable battle to hold on for fear of the everlasting habitation that their friendship with the treasures of unrighteousness provided. Matthew 6:21 says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." I'm going to end it there for now. I want to say that my findings may not match what some people believe about this parable, and that's okay. There is a certain amount of speculation with regard to Jesus' tone as he spoke these words, and I do not claim to be a scholar, so I may be wrong. My goal is to find some clarity, depth, and meaning. I hope this helps. I will see you in the next episode, where we will further this investigation, and some of what I've said may make more sense.